We are the Air Quality and Noise Consultancy Service, so we're going to go through what we're about, who our clients are in general, and where we come into the process and where we may fit into your work areas.
Press down on the keyboard. If you just press down on the keyboard, you'll be alright.
You're not from the IT department.
There you go. It's on now.
Boom. Right, yeah. Where are we? Well, most of us are in the Manchester office, Air Quality Consultants, Ensafe Acoustics. We have two quality consultants in the Croydon, which is a new venture, fairly new in the last 12 months. We realised we're getting a lot of work in London, and whilst air quality we can do a lot of the work from the desktop, from the office. We really needed a presence down there, and it would save me a lot of time going up and down on the train. So we've got an associate director now in there, and 3 acoustics consultants in the Winchester office. So that's myself there. I head up both of the teams. Another boom, the Joshes, ably backed up in the air quality team by Mrs. Davis and Jones, always known as the Joshes because people never remember which one's which. Sometimes collectively known as Josh I, or Josh squared, Josh to the power of 2. Either way, there's always an argument about who is alpha Josh and beta Josh. I'm sure you've got, yeah, he'll tell you it's alpha. Also in the office, important member of the air quality team, Lewis Ellison. Lewis also drives a new lighting and daylight sunlight assessment service that we provide as well, so I'll touch on that a bit later. Martin Park heads up the acoustic teams in the north. And the lovely Izzy Samfire, who take a stand. There she is. She, along with Nick, Showed Me the Money Haig, lead the acoustics teams in the Winchester office. And as I mentioned before, we won't forget Matt Mitchell. There he is. He's come down to Boss London and take over there. Okay, start with the air quality side of things. If you could hit the video. It's a bit of air quality meditation. To close your eyes, let me take you to a world of pollution, odour, nitrogen dioxide. It's beautiful, isn't it? But what we have here, you can open your eyes now. Oh, they're asleep. What we have here is, gosh, you could just put anything like this here. It needs planning permission, of course, but not just planning permission, it needs an assessment service to go with it. So most of our work is for the planning service. So we'll do an assessment to see what all the impacts from this, so it could be the cars that this may generate. There may be a problem down 2 miles down the road, and it's causing HGVs to go through that area, so we'll have to assess the impact of that on the air quality there. Obviously there's a stack here that might just not only impact on the human sensitive receptors, but also on ecological impacts around as well. Mineral extraction and construction generates dust, so we'll also consider the impacts of this as well. I think this year we've got a composting site here, and if there's anaerobic digestion, this will cause air quality and odour releases. So we tend to come in, not the land buying stage, we tend to come in at the planning stage, and often it's a planning consultant that'll be driving a project there, but also the house builders, that they'll drive their own projects to, architects, energy providers, which could be anaerobic digestion, as I said, or peak power plants. We do a lot of work for those. What peak power is energy generation during the times of most demand on the grid. So the short-term generation. A lot of industrial contacts we get to. Done a lot of work recently for the Heineken plant in Manchester. Still working on the freebies, though, aren't we, Josh? So I'll hand over now. We'll go into a bit more detail about the process and the capabilities we've got, Matt.
Hey, right. So, as Conor mentioned, our main core services. Basically, before we get into that, just quickly. So, air pollution is you're probably aware of it a bit more these days. It's more in the public realm. It's more engaged. You're probably more aware of air pollution, mainly from traffic. Our world traditionally is not indoor, it's outdoor. The regulations are for the outdoor. It's changing over time. That stopped. It's just here. Okay, I'll come back here. That's it. So we tend to assess what's outside, and our involvement stops at the building facade. We don't get involved yet in indoor air quality. It's a whole different world. So, air quality assessment and odour assessments, mainly desk-based, mainly using off-the-shelf computer software modelling systems, and we also then get involved in the kind of the mitigation design advice. The interesting thing, especially for people in this room, is where we come in. Now, as Colin mentioned, traditionally we are pre and post planning. We are involved in basically the decision-making process. As we have limited, once a design on a building is fixed, there's limited things we can do to actually solve the problems. So clients are bringing us further in the concept design, and occasionally into the purchasing land, very occasionally though. So our industry is shifting that way, rather than kind of getting involved in the middle over here. So the other area we heavily focus on and we're trying to build is basically the monitoring and validation stage. So that can be anything from basically looking at a survey whilst you're deciding what to do with the land, all the way through to demolition and construction, and occasionally into operational. Now, it's traditionally quite a hard field for air quality consultants to make money in, because you need to do more monitoring. You need things like vans, you need basic surveyors that go to site a lot, you need to basically have somewhere you can keep equipment and store equipment and maintain equipment. And if only we knew kind of another company and basically people who had all of these things, we could potentially build that side of the business. So maybe, who knows? That was obviously tongue-in-cheek. We have a few jobs in monitoring, and we'd love to get more into the demolition and construction side. Is that it?
The main tool that we use is the dark art of air quality modelling. This is what we can do most things from the desktop. What we put into it is an idea of the traffic flows on the major roads, and we then know what the emissions are going to be over time. So we model this using metadata over the course of a full year, or if it's industrial process over the course of 5 years. And what we'll just do is take into account the buildings, the topography, the meteorology, and it will run through the day. As you can see, obviously you get a change in pattern throughout the day, the red spots showing up at the rush hours, obviously. And at the end of this, what we'll get is a nice picture that will give us average concentrations that we can compare with the air quality objectives. Now, our, like many of us, areas are driven by legislation and the planning system. So in the legislation in this country, there are air quality objectives to be achieved, and we need to show that a new development is not going to cause any worsening of this where it's significant. But also to show that if you've got a new development in this area, that it's not going to be subject to unacceptable levels of pollution. In this case, it potentially was. So this is a project that Josh dealt with, and we put forward some mitigation measures, which you might want to describe as an example.
Yeah, so effectively, as you can see here, it's exceeding the national air quality objective line, which is the 40. So effectively, what we did was recommend mechanical ventilation with natural filtration for all sensitive uses. That was included in the nursery and residential units. So we put that forward, but the London Borough of Hillingdon refused it. One of the main reasons was on air quality grounds. So Mr. Mayor took over, called a sort of planning committee, was it committee? Yeah, a committee hearing, and basically said, agreed with everything that we put in our report and all our recommendations, and then said, the client basically said, yeah, we can implement all that. So then it went through.
Thank you. And one of the things we've got the expertise within the team to do is represent us at hearings, public inquiries, and committee meetings, and provide that expert service and knowledge. It's a really good position and something we really should be proud of, and we sell as a service. We also get involved with monitoring. What? We don't do a great deal of this, but one of the things we do is diffusion tube monitoring. These are great little things. We can throw them up on lampposts. If Alpha or Beta Josh, Big Josh, goes along, he can reach there himself, he's that big. But these guys here, bring on a ladder. I mean, the great thing about these, they're cheap and we can just throw them up there. They can be used for indoor pollution as well, and it's something we're investigating at the moment to validate the effectiveness of such ventilation that Josh mentioned before. We don't just do quality monitoring, we also do odour monitoring. Now the best way to monitor odour, I mean there are mechanical systems you can use, but the best way is to use our noses. Now you can't just use any old nose, we need to use a nose that's been tested in the laboratory. So what we do is we send the consultants off to a laboratory and they're presented with 3 tubes and then various intensities of an odour. It smells a bit like cheesy Watsons. I think that's the closest thing you can get to it. It's not particularly pleasant. And what it does is it assesses what your level of odour acuity is. And at the end of it, you get a lovely certificate to say what our sensitivity to odour is. Now there's an ideal range that we need to be in, and thankfully all of our consultants are in the ideal range for our noses. And Lewis here, the first time he went, I'm going to say the ideal level is between 20 and 80, and this time it's great, he's got 35. First time he went, he came back with a certificate saying 200 on it, which means he couldn't smell a thing. I think he had a peg on his nose. He just didn't fancy going out and standing next to Civic Treatment Works. Anyway, after 2 years of tolerating his excuse that he couldn't do it, we sent him back again, and he's come back with an ideal range. So all our consultants can now go out and do that service, which is fantastic. While we're on the subject of Lewis, he does daylight and artificial assessments for new planners, and what these things do, if you can hit the button there, he builds 3D models, and we can assess what the natural sunlight and overshadowing of proposed buildings and existing buildings are going to be subject to. And again, this is another requirement of many planning applications, particularly in London and other major built-up areas. Not just that, we can look at artificial lighting. If we've got a residential development next to a sports pitch with flood lighting, we can see what the impacts of that lighting will be on the development. In this case, we realised that if we could alter the settings in the flood lighting, we could very much reduce the light trespass and impact onto the proposed development. So we do that side of things as well. Moving on to the noise quickly, and I realised noise is a very, very technical subject, and we were asked to keep this at a certain level. When I saw the delegate list today, I think I've got it just about right. Noise is a very subjective thing. If you like it, it's just a sound. See, he's quite happy with that. We consider all types of noise. Leisure noise. Ooh, what's this? It's a train. Still happy though, he's got quite a high tolerance, this guy. There's razzle dazzle. Car noise. Combination of all these things suddenly starts getting a bit what you might call noisy. Eventually he's reached his limit as razzle dazzle. Before he gets nasty, we better stop it. But what we'll do is I'll hand you over to someone who has a little bit more expertise in noise than razzle dazzle here. When I first mentioned I was going to bring a bit of razzle dazzle to the presentation, Nick turned up in a sparkly suit and a couple of dancing girls and a champagne glass. Thankfully he brought a change of clothes as well.
Thanks very much. You want to go back to that a second, actually?
Okay. Yeah.
This actually covers not only the breadth of our work, but also a lot of the nuance and subtlety. Because it's a very important point that it is very psychological noise. A lot of the time it's used as an excuse for when people just don't like a development and so on. So it's very important to use the appropriate methodologies and assessments, because what one person is totally happy with, another person will find completely disagreeable. Some of the things here would be described as statutory nuisance, which we don't really get involved with, but the transport noise is the mainstay of what we do. Noise from sporting events is also considered. We do have some involvement with things like noise from pubs and clubs, music and the like, which you see in the foreground with the drum. And yeah, this covers most of the breadth of it. How's this work? Right. Kaboom. So our clients, a lot of our clients, I should say there's a great deal of crossover with air quality. We have a lot of the same clients, we get involved at the same sorts of stages of the process. The legislation is very similar, so yeah, a lot of overlap and analogies. But one of our main clients, probably about 90% of our work, comes from housing developers who tend to get a cheap bit of land and then want to build on it and find themselves having all sorts of problems. So a typical site for us would be this one here, where someone wants to, they built this nice cheap piece of land and they want to build some residential development there, unaware that the road traffic noise situation is going to be a bit of a problem. So we would then get involved and assess that. Similarly, railways, industry can also be a considerable problem for new developments. So both of these are from the point of view of helping a housing developer get a development through planning. Similarly, then you have the other side of the coin. You have the situation where your client is a problem, or potentially a problem, or not a problem at all. So yeah, that's how we would portray it. So good examples being construction noise and vibration assessment. So during the building of any major new development, quite often a construction noise and vibration assessment will be needed. So, yeah, the planning authority often say, yeah, just do this. It's a very generic assessment. It's something we can do fairly straightforward. Another example where the developer is arguably a problem is industry and commercial noise. So a scrapyard being constructed next door to a house, or any sort of industry you care to name, or commercial activity, or shop, even something as modest as a new block of flats which has air conditioning equipment on it would have to be assessed. So any new noise source going into a residential area would have to be assessed. So these are the kind of surveys we do. So here is an example of a site. So what we have here is a new proposed residential development here. Residential and office, I think this one was actually. So we would look at a Google map and see what are the potential sources. So we'd see here there's a railway running nearby. So we'd assess railway noise. We'd also assess vibration. Pretty much any time we do that for these sorts of assessments is for trains. And it's never a problem. It's a rigmarole. You go through it and you get the answer, this is fine, but it's a process we have to go through. Other surveys we would do, we'd measure the road noise. There's a very prescribed system for how you do that. We'd measure commercial noise, in this case from a car wash, which was there. Also, there's a factory up here, so we'd measure the noise due to that. We would then measure the ambient background noise level that's prevalent in that location. Because, actually, I shouldn't come to this. Oh, here's an example of how we measure things. It's a thing on a tripod, which tend to get stolen if you're not careful, because they look like they're worth money, but they're not. Well, bits of it is, but they will steal the bit that isn't. Here's an example of the kind of work we can do. So we have a computer modelling system, actually very similar to what Connell showed you. We don't have animation, so sadly. But we can build like a computer model of a world, three-dimensional with topography. We can put in buildings, roads, rail, barriers, you name it, and then put in noise sources and just examine how the sound will propagate. We can then play around with barriers, different orientations, and things like that, and just, you name it, we can do it. So a very typical situation for this would be what we see down here, where we've got a motorway just to the side here, and then this is a housing development. And you can see what they've done here is they've used a very intelligent defensive design. So they've made the gardens nice and quiet back with these nice green colours. Horrible loud blue, nice quiet green. So we can advise on how to lay the site out so that they hit their requirements. That's a sort of mainstay of what we do. Similarly, we've done the same thing here for glazing, so we can tell what kind of glazing they need, if they need high-spec glazing, whatever. If they need alternative ventilation and stuff, again, ties in with air quality. And another slightly unusual one here where a guy had 200 macaws, which were annoying his neighbour, so we gave him some mitigation strategies, putting hay bales around his macaws. So just get you know we can turn our hand to a lot of things. A lot of our work is very samey, but we can be as bespoke as you like. You know, we can also get involved in appeals and so on. You know, we've been those people sitting next to the barrister, making nice people lose their amenity. There we go. There's that little fella again. He always has the last word. And another field that we're thinking about getting into is noise at work. This is something we do now and again, but it's a tough gig to get because there are a lot of one-man bands involved, people who go in very cheap. So it's hard to win work for the kind of fee that we would like to go in at. Probably the only kind of clients who are worth dealing with are the large clients where you can really get stuck in and sort of use intelligent ways of approaching it rather than the very basic way that a lot of one-man bands approach things. But it's certainly a field we can explore, and it's something I'm hoping to do as a result of our merger, because I think it's a natural synergy. Synergy. There we go. And typical fees for our assessments, about £2,000. Anything else I was going to say? We do a lot of CPDs, going and see clients and tell them about what we do. This was a very compressed version of one of our CPDs. So, yeah, that's us.